It was a chilly evening when the mechanic finished fixing the last car in his small shop. The sky was turning dark and a light drizzle had started falling. He wiped his hands on a worn-out rag and looked around his modest shop. Tools were scattered, the floor was dirty, and the smell of oil and gasoline lingered in the air. It was not much, but it was his world. Every day he worked hard, repairing cars and doing small jobs to make ends meet. Most of the money he earned went straight to paying rent and buying food, leaving little for anything else. Despite the struggles, he never complained. He believed in working honestly and helping others whenever he could. As he locked the shop door and stepped outside, a cold wind hit him. He pulled his jacket tighter around him and noticed something moving near the corner of the street. Squinting, he realized it was a small child sitting on the wet pavement. The child's thin clothes offered little protection against the rain and wind. Their tiny body was trembling and their eyes were wide with fear. The mechanic felt a pang in his heart. He knew that look. He had seen it before in people who were lost and alone, but he had never seen it in a child this small. Without thinking, he walked over and crouched beside the child. "Hey there," he said softly, trying not to scare them. The child looked up, their eyes glistening with tears. "Are you okay?" he asked. The child shook their head, shivering uncontrollably. The mechanic noticed that their shoes were wet, their hands red from the cold, and they were clutching their thin jacket around themselves as if it could keep the cold away. He glanced around, hoping to find some place open nearby, maybe a cafe or a shop where he could buy something warm, but the streets were almost empty and the stores were closed. His stomach tightened. He had very little money in his pocket, just a single dollar left from the day's earnings. It was barely enough for himself, let alone someone else, but as he looked at the child, he felt something inside him shift. He could not leave them there, not in this cold and rain. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the last dollar, and told the child, "Come with me. I'll get you something warm." The child hesitated at first. Their eyes were filled with caution and fear. But the mechanic's gentle tone and kind eyes seemed to break through the fear. Slowly they stood up, holding onto the mechanic's hand. The warmth of the small gesture seemed to ease their shivering a little. Together, they walked to a small corner store that was just about to close. The mechanic explained to the shopkeeper what had happened, and with the dollar he had, he bought a small blanket and a simple sandwich for the child. He returned to the street corner, where the child sat on the curb, still shivering. He wrapped the blanket around the child and handed them the sandwich. The child took it slowly, almost afraid to trust that someone would be this kind to them. As they ate, the mechanic sat beside them, sharing the warmth of his presence. He asked the child their name, where they were from, and why they were out in the rain. The child's voice was soft, almost a whisper. They explained that they had run away from a shelter nearby, where other children had bullied them. They didn't know where to go, and they felt completely alone. Hearing this, the mechanic's heart ached. He remembered his own childhood, times when he felt small and helpless, and he could not bear the thought of leaving this child alone. His home was small and humble, with barely enough room for himself, but he knew it would be better than the cold street. He said, "Come with me. You can stay at my place tonight. You'll be safe there." The child looked uncertain, glancing at the dark streets and then back at the mechanic. Finally, after a long pause, they nodded. Together, they walked back to the mechanic's small apartment above the shop. It was simple, with old furniture, a small kitchen, and a single bedroom. The mechanic made a warm spot for the child with blankets and pillows. He gave them a glass of warm milk and made sure they were comfortable. The child's shivering slowed, and for the first time in hours, they looked relieved. As the night went on, the mechanic could not stop thinking about the child. He wondered if he had done enough, if there was more he could do to help. But he also felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that he had done what he could in that moment. The child eventually fell asleep, exhausted but safe. The mechanic stayed awake for a while, listening to the rain outside and thinking about the strange turn of events. He realized that even though he had very little, he could still make a big difference in someone's life. The next morning, he woke early, prepared a simple breakfast, and made sure the child had something to eat. He explained that he needed to open the shop, but he promised to check on them every hour. The child seemed shy but nodded, trusting him in a way that was rare for someone who had been through so much. As he walked to the shop, he felt a sense of purpose that he had not felt in a long time. His day started like any other, fixing cars, greeting customers, and handling small repairs. but his mind kept drifting back to the child. Throughout the day, he found small moments to show care. He slipped the child an extra sandwich when no one was looking, left the door unlocked so they could come into the shop if it got too cold, and even brought a small toy he had saved from a garage sale. The child began to smile more, laugh a little, and even help with small tasks like picking up tools or sweeping the floor. It was a small connection, but it was enough to start building trust. By evening, the mechanic realized how much he had grown attached to the child. He felt a mixture of worry and hope. Worry because he did not know what the future held, and hope because he knew that sometimes even the smallest acts of kindness could change a life. He sat down with the child that evening, wrapped in the same blanket from the night before, and said softly, "No matter what happens, you are not alone. I will make sure you are safe." The child looked up at him, their eyes wide and trusting. For the first time in a long while, they felt a sense of belonging, even if it was only temporary. The mechanic knew that their journey together was just beginning, but he also knew that this moment, this act of simple kindness, had already started to change both their lives. The warmth of the blanket, the warmth of a shared meal, and the warmth of human care had begun to fill the emptiness that both of them had carried. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside the small apartment above the shop, there was a sense of peace. Two lives, seemingly ordinary and struggling, had intersected in a way that neither could have expected. The mechanic had given his last dollar, but he had gained something far more valuable, a chance to make a real difference, to bring hope to a small child, and to remind himself of the power of compassion. And for the child, who had wandered the streets alone and frightened, there was finally a place where they could rest, feel safe, and begin to trust again. As night fell, the mechanic sat quietly, reflecting on the day's events. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for certain: he had done the right thing. The small act of spending his last dollar had sparked a connection that could not be measured in money. It was measured in warmth, care, and the simple human bond that grows when someone shows they truly care. And in that moment, both the mechanic and the child understood that kindness, even in its smallest form, has the power to change lives forever. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of the small apartment above the shop. The child had slept soundly through the night, wrapped in the blanket the mechanic had bought with his last dollar. For the first time in days, the child felt safe and warm. The mechanic was already awake, preparing a simple breakfast of bread, milk, and a few eggs he had in the small kitchen. He moved quietly, not wanting to wake the child abruptly, but the smell of food soon roused them. The child sat up, blinking, still shy and quiet, but there was a softness in their eyes that hadn't been there before. "Good morning," the mechanic said gently, placing the plate in front of them. "Eat up, we've got a long day ahead." The child nodded and took a bite. They were careful at first, but soon they ate more freely. The mechanic watched with a small smile, happy to see the child eating, finally nourished and comforted. For him, this was more than just giving food. It was a first step in healing a heart that had been hurt and frightened. After breakfast, the mechanic had to open his shop for the day. He explained to the child that he had work to do, but promised to check on them regularly. "Stay close by," he said. "If you get cold or scared, come to the shop. I'll be there." The child nodded, still hesitant but beginning to trust him. As he walked down the narrow stairway to the shop, he thought about the day ahead and the small, vulnerable life he had taken responsibility for. Even with so little, he knew he could make a difference. The shop was busy that morning with a few cars waiting for repairs. The mechanic moved from car to car, fixing brakes, changing oil, and adjusting engines. But no matter how absorbed he was in work, his mind kept drifting back to the child. He wondered if they were cold or lonely, if they needed anything. During a short break, he stepped outside and called up to the small window of the apartment. The child waved, and a smile spread across their face. That simple gesture filled the mechanic with warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. As the day progressed, he found little ways to include the child. He slipped extra food up to the apartment, left small notes of encouragement, and even brought a small toy he had found in a box of old items he had kept from garage sales. The child began to respond, smiling more often, laughing softly, and even helping with minor tasks like picking up tools or sweeping the floor of the apartment. It was a slow, careful process, but a bond was forming. one built on trust, care, and shared humanity. By late afternoon, the rain returned, and the streets became wet and slippery. The child peeked through the window, watching people rush by under umbrellas. The mechanic noticed the longing in their eyes and decided to bring them downstairs. He wrapped the child in a warm jacket and walked them through the shop. Customers smiled at the sight, some commenting on the child's presence. The mechanic explained briefly, simply saying, "This little one needed some help. I couldn't leave them out there." There was no judgment, only a quiet admiration for his kindness. Throughout the day, he tried to find information about the child's family or guardians. He called local shelters and authorities, explaining the situation. No one had reported a missing child matching the description, which made him worry even more. The child, meanwhile, had started to open up, sharing small stories about their life at the shelter, the bullying they had endured, and the loneliness they had felt. Listening to these stories, the mechanic felt a deep empathy and a stronger commitment to protect and care for this young life. As evening approached, he prepared a simple dinner and brought it upstairs. The child was quieter than usual, lost in thought. After a few minutes, they spoke softly. "Will I have to go back there?" The mechanic shook his head gently. "Not if I can help it. We'll find a safe place for you, and until then, you're not going anywhere cold or scary. You're safe with me." The child nodded, a faint smile appearing, and for the first time in many days, they seemed to relax fully. The mechanic spent some time that evening teaching the child small things: how to fold clothes, how to keep the small apartment tidy, and even some basics about fixing small things in the shop. The child listened carefully, eager to learn and happy to be included. They began to understand that this man, despite having so little himself, had given them something priceless: care, attention, and a safe place to be. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, but inside the small apartment, there was warmth and light. The mechanic felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of purpose that had been missing from his days filled with struggle and hard work. For the child, the world had suddenly changed from a place of fear and cold to one of hope and safety. They began to speak more, laugh more, and even offer small acts of kindness in return, like tidying up the kitchen or helping set the table. It was a simple exchange, but it built a connection that grew stronger with each passing hour. Later, when the mechanic stepped out briefly to check on the shop, he noticed the child standing by the window looking at the street with wide eyes. He waved, and the child waved back. This small interaction reminded him of the fragility of life and the importance of compassion. He realized that his own struggles, though difficult, had equipped him with empathy and the ability to act when someone else needed help most. Night fell, and they settled in for the evening. The mechanic made sure the child had clean clothes and a warm place to sleep. They shared stories quietly, and he listened to the child talk about their dreams, fears, and hopes. For the first time in a long while, the child felt heard, understood, and cared for. The mechanic felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that despite the challenges he faced, he had made a difference in someone else's life. As they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in warmth and safety, the mechanic reflected on the day's events. He thought about the power of small actions and the ripple effect they could create. A single act of kindness, even from someone with very little, could change the course of a life. For the child, this day had marked the beginning of hope and trust. For the mechanic, it had rekindled a sense of purpose and the understanding that true wealth is measured not in money, but in the love and care we give to others. Through that night, both slept peacefully, the child feeling secure for the first time in days, and the mechanic feeling a quiet joy that came from knowing he had done the right thing. The bond they had begun to form in such a short time was already strong, built on compassion, trust, and the shared experience of finding warmth and kindness in a world that had often been cold and harsh. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now they had this moment of peace, and it was enough. Days passed, and the bond between the mechanic and the child grew stronger. Each morning, the mechanic would prepare a simple breakfast and make sure the child had what they needed for the day. Sometimes he took a short break to sit with the child in the small living area, listening to their thoughts and stories. These moments became a comforting routine, a quiet world where the child felt safe and the mechanic felt a renewed sense of purpose. The child had begun to smile more, laugh softly, and even help with small chores around the apartment. Simple things like folding clothes or helping sweep the floor brought a sense of normalcy to their lives. The mechanic watched closely, realizing how important these small tasks were for giving the child a feeling of control and belonging. He encouraged them gently, never rushing or scolding, only guiding with patience and kindness. Outside, the streets continued their usual rhythm, but inside the small apartment, a different kind of energy existed. The mechanic and the child shared quiet meals, small conversations, and tiny acts of care that strengthened their connection. Every day, the child seemed more confident, more willing to trust the world even after all they had been through. The mechanic, in turn, felt a warmth he had long forgotten, a feeling that came from giving without expecting anything in return. The mechanic continued his work at the shop, fixing cars and helping customers, but now his mind often wandered back to the child. He found himself thinking about ways to improve their situation. The child had no family that he could immediately contact, and the shelters seemed complicated and unwelcoming. He worried about what would happen if the child was forced to return to a place that had caused them so much pain. Each evening, he would return home with this worry, but also with the determination to provide comfort, stability, and hope. One evening, the child approached the mechanic with a question. "Do you think I will ever have a real home again?" They spoke softly, a mixture of hope and fear in their eyes. The mechanic knelt down to be at eye level with the child. "We will find a safe place, I promise," he said. "And until then, this is your home. You are not alone anymore." The child's small hand found his and they squeezed it, a silent acknowledgement of trust and gratitude. The next day, the mechanic took the child with him to the shop. He wanted them to see his world, to understand that life could be hard but also full of small joys. The child watched carefully as he worked, asking questions about the cars, the tools, and the repairs. The mechanic answered every question patiently, happy to see curiosity spark in the child's eyes. He even allowed the child to help with small, safe tasks like passing tools or wiping surfaces. Each small act of involvement made the child feel important and capable. As the day went on, the child began to share more of their past. They spoke of times in the shelter when they felt invisible, moments of fear and loneliness, and dreams they had for a better life. The mechanic listened, never judging, only providing a space where the child could speak freely. He realized that these conversations were healing, giving the child a sense of being seen and understood. By the evening, word of the mechanic's kindness had started to spread through the neighborhood. A few neighbors had noticed the child visiting the shop and asked about their presence. The mechanic explained simply that the child needed help and that he was providing it. There was no boastfulness in his words, only a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes small acts of compassion matter more than anything else. The neighbors nodded, some offering small gifts, extra food, or warm clothing to help. The mechanic was touched but also cautious. He wanted to protect the child's privacy and ensure their safety. Still, he recognized that the support of the community could provide additional comfort and stability. Slowly, the neighborhood began to rally around them, offering small acts of generosity that made life a little easier. The child noticed these gestures and began to feel a sense of belonging, something they had never experienced before. Evenings became a time for reflection. The mechanic and the child would sit together, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking softly about dreams, stories, and hopes. The mechanic shared small lessons about life, about resilience, and about the importance of kindness. The child listened carefully, absorbing every word, and often responded with questions or thoughts of their own. This dialogue built a foundation of trust and understanding that neither of them had experienced before. As the days turned into a week, the mechanic continued his efforts to find a more permanent solution for the child's situation. He contacted local authorities, shelters, and community organizations, explaining the circumstances and seeking guidance. The child remained with him throughout this process, feeling safer with someone who genuinely cared. The mechanic reassured them that no matter what happened, he would remain a protector and a friend. One afternoon, as the mechanic was cleaning up the shop, the child came running in, excitement in their eyes. "Look," they said, holding a small drawing they had made. It was a picture of them and the mechanic together, surrounded by bright colors and smiling faces. The mechanic smiled widely, touched by the gesture. "This is wonderful," he said, placing it on a small shelf where he could see it every day. The child beamed, proud that their small act of creativity had brought happiness. Life continued in this small rhythm of care and connection. The mechanic worked hard, the child learned and grew, and the small apartment became a place of safety and warmth. The bond between them deepened, built on trust, kindness, and the shared understanding that even in a world full of challenges, compassion could create hope. Each day reinforced the lesson that small acts, even from someone with very little, could change the course of a life. One rainy evening, the mechanic sat with the child, reflecting on how far they had come together. The child looked up at him, their eyes filled with trust and warmth. "Thank you for everything," they said softly. The mechanic shook his head, smiling. "You don't need to thank me. This is what people do for each other. We take care of those who need help." The child nodded, feeling a sense of security and belonging that was new and precious. As the night settled, both prepared for sleep. The child, wrapped in a warm blanket, finally felt a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. The mechanic, watching over them, felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that his selfless actions had created a safe space for another human being. The small apartment, filled with the sounds of gentle breathing and the soft hum of the city outside, became a symbol of hope, compassion, and the power of human connection. Through these days, the mechanic realized that even in his own struggle and poverty, he had the ability to bring warmth and care to someone who needed it most. And for the child, the simple acts of kindness, the blanket, the food, the safety, had started to mend a heart that had been hurt by fear and neglect. Together, they were creating a life filled with small joys, trust, and the understanding that even the smallest gestures of love could leave a lasting impact. In this shared journey, both lives were slowly being transformed, teaching lessons of resilience, empathy, and the profound effect of human kindness. The small apartment above the shop had become a quiet refuge for the child. Each day, the mechanic made sure they had everything they needed. He worked tirelessly at the shop, yet always found moments to check on the child, making sure they were warm, fed, and safe. The child had begun to laugh more freely and was slowly gaining confidence, no longer haunted by the fear that had once gripped them so tightly. One morning, as the mechanic was repairing a car, a neighbor stopped by. She had heard about the child staying with him and wanted to offer some help. She brought a small bag of clothes and a few books for the child. The mechanic thanked her warmly, feeling both gratitude and relief. The child, curious, looked at the books and clothes with wide eyes. It was the first time in a long while that they felt such care and attention without fear or suspicion. Days turned into a week, and the routine continued. The mechanic balanced his work and care, sometimes feeling exhausted but never regretting his choices. He realized that helping the child had given him a new sense of purpose. He watched them learn new things, eat properly, sleep well, and begin to trust again. These small victories were significant, and each one strengthened the bond between them. One rainy afternoon, the mechanic received a call from a local community center. A volunteer had heard about his story and wanted to know more. The volunteer promised to help find the child a more permanent, safe place to stay if needed. The mechanic felt a mix of relief and hope. He wanted the child to stay safe, but he also hoped that they could remain together until the right solution was found. He explained the situation to the child, who listened quietly, processing the idea that there might be other people who could help too. In the following days, small changes began to happen. The community slowly started to notice the mechanic's selfless actions. A few more neighbors brought warm meals, clothes, and even small toys. The child began to feel a sense of belonging. They realized that kindness could exist even in a world that often felt harsh and unforgiving. Each gesture of care, no matter how small, helped them heal a little more. One evening, the mechanic decided to take the child outside for a short walk. The rain had stopped and the streets were glistening under the soft glow of the streetlights. They walked hand in hand, moving slowly through the neighborhood. The child looked around at the world with fresh eyes, noticing small details they had never paid attention to before: the flowers on windowsills, the laughter of children playing, the smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. The mechanic watched them, smiling quietly. This simple moment, a walk in the rain-washed streets, was a reminder of how precious small experiences could be. Back at the apartment, the child started helping more with daily tasks. They learned to cook simple meals, fold clothes, and keep the small space tidy. Each task gave them a sense of responsibility and pride. The mechanic encouraged them. praising their efforts and showing that even small contributions mattered. The child's confidence grew with each passing day, and their trust in the mechanic deepened. They began to see him not just as a protector, but as someone who genuinely cared about their well-being. As the bond strengthened, the mechanic took steps to reach out to the authorities again. He wanted to make sure that the child would have legal protection and a safe environment in the long term. He explained the situation in detail, emphasizing the child's vulnerability and the importance of finding a secure place. The child stayed close during these discussions, feeling reassured by the mechanic's presence. Though the idea of change made them nervous, the trust they had built allowed them to feel safe even with uncertainty. Word of the mechanic's actions continued to spread. A local journalist heard about the story and decided to feature it in a community newsletter. The journalist visited the shop, taking careful notes and speaking with the mechanic about the child's situation. The mechanic spoke honestly, without exaggeration, simply telling the truth about how he had used his last dollar to help someone in need. The journalist left, promising to share the story in a way that honored the mechanic's kindness and the child's courage. The following days brought more support from the community. Donations of food, clothes, and small essentials began to arrive at the shop. Neighbors offered to help with chores or accompany the child on short errands. The mechanic was deeply moved by this outpouring of care. He saw how a single act of kindness could ripple outward, inspiring others to help. The child noticed these gestures too, feeling the warmth of a community that was slowly becoming a second family. One evening, the mechanic and the child sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. The child leaned against him, feeling safe and cared for. They spoke softly about dreams and hopes for the future. The mechanic listened, offering guidance and encouragement, helping the child understand that their past did not define them. The child felt a sense of belonging that had been missing for so long, and the mechanic felt the quiet joy of knowing he had made a real difference in someone's life. As the night grew darker, the mechanic reflected on the journey so far. From the moment he had seen the child shivering in the rain, everything had changed. He had spent his last dollar, but he had gained something far more valuable: a connection, a sense of purpose, and the knowledge that even small actions of kindness could create lasting change. The child, once lost and frightened, was now slowly healing, learning to trust and beginning to hope again. The apartment was quiet as they prepared for sleep. The child, wrapped in blankets, finally felt warmth and security. The mechanic watched over them, feeling a sense of fulfillment that words could not fully capture. He understood that the days ahead would bring challenges, but he was ready to face them. Together they had found a small world of safety, care, and human connection that could withstand the hardships outside. Through this experience, the mechanic realized that true wealth is measured not by money, but by the love and care we give to others. The child, once alone and frightened, had found a protector and friend in him. Together, they were learning that even in a world full of difficulties, kindness and compassion could create hope, trust, and lasting change. Each day strengthened their bond, proving that simple acts of care could transform lives and bring warmth where it was most needed. Weeks had passed since the mechanic had first found the child shivering on the street. In that time, both their lives had changed in ways neither could have imagined. The child had grown stronger, more confident, and even more trusting of people. The mechanic, once consumed by the daily struggles of making ends meet, had discovered a renewed sense of purpose. Their bond had become unbreakable, formed through shared moments of care, understanding, and quiet acts of kindness. One morning, the mechanic received a call from the local authorities. They had finally located the child's parents, who had been searching desperately for their lost child. The child's eyes widened with both surprise and hesitation. They had not seen their parents for some time, and the thought of returning to them was both comforting and frightening. The mechanic knelt down, gently taking their hands. "It's okay," he said softly. "You'll go home safely, and you'll always have someone who cares about you." The child nodded, a mix of emotions in their eyes. Later that day, the child met their parents. There were tears, hugs, and words of relief that had been bottled up for weeks. The mechanic watched from a distance, feeling a quiet joy in seeing the reunion. He knew that his role in their life had been important, that his small act of kindness had kept the child safe long enough for this moment to happen. Even though he had no family of his own, he felt the deep satisfaction that comes from helping others in their time of need. The community that had begun to notice the mechanic's selfless actions continued to support him. People brought meals, small gifts, and even helped with repairs at his shop. Word of his kindness had spread beyond the neighborhood, inspiring others to consider how they could make a difference in someone else's life. The mechanic never sought recognition, but he quietly appreciated the support, knowing it made his life and the lives of others better. The child returned to their parents, but the bond with the mechanic remained strong. They visited often, sharing stories, laughter, and moments of care. The mechanic had become a permanent part of their life, a reminder that kindness could exist even in the most difficult circumstances. The parents were deeply grateful, acknowledging that without the mechanic's timely help, their child might have faced serious danger. They often expressed their thanks, bringing small gestures of appreciation and ensuring that the mechanic knew how valued he was. The child began to thrive in a stable environment, attending school regularly, learning and growing. They carried with them the lessons of trust and compassion they had learned from the mechanic. At the same time, the mechanic continued to work at his shop, now with more support from the community. He repaired cars, helped customers, and quietly nurtured the connections he had built. His days were busy, but filled with a sense of purpose that had been missing before. In the evenings, the mechanic often reflected on the journey that had brought him and the child together. It had started with a single act of kindness, a dollar spent, a blanket given, a meal shared. That small gesture had rippled outward, affecting not only the child and himself but also the community around them. He realized that helping someone in need, even when resources were limited, could create a profound and lasting impact. The child's growth was evident in every visit. They laughed more, spoke more confidently, and expressed genuine care for others. They often shared stories of the mechanic's influence on their life, telling friends and family about the man who had saved them when they felt lost and alone. The mechanic listened with quiet pride, knowing that he had helped shape a future filled with hope, resilience, and empathy. As months passed, the mechanic's life slowly improved. The community support allowed him to repair his shop, expand services, and even save a little for emergencies. While he had started with very little, the relationships he had built provided a wealth far greater than money. He had learned that true richness comes from compassion, trust, and the ability to make a positive difference in another person's life. One special evening, the mechanic received a visit from the child and their parents. They brought a small gift, a handmade card with words of thanks and drawings of their shared moments. The child looked up at the mechanic, their eyes shining. "Thank you for saving me," they said simply. The mechanic smiled, feeling the warmth of gratitude and connection. "You were never alone," he replied. "You just needed someone to be there, and I'm glad I could help." The neighborhood continued to flourish with acts of kindness inspired by this story. Others began to notice that even small gestures could create meaningful change. Some helped neighbors, others supported local children in need, and the ripple effect of compassion grew. The mechanic had unknowingly become a symbol of hope, demonstrating that one person's care could influence an entire community. Life settled into a comforting rhythm. The mechanic worked at his shop. The child continued to grow and learn, and their bond remained strong, rooted in mutual respect, care, and the shared experience of facing challenges together. The child had learned to trust again, and the mechanic had rediscovered the power of human connection. Looking back, the mechanic realized that the moment he chose to spend his last dollar on a shivering child had changed everything. It had not only provided immediate safety and warmth, but had also built a bridge of trust, hope, and compassion that would last a lifetime. The child's life had been transformed, the community had been inspired, and the mechanic himself had found a deeper sense of purpose and fulfillment. In the quiet moments, when the shop was empty and the city outside was calm, the mechanic often thought about the journey they had shared. He understood that the world could be harsh and unforgiving, but acts of kindness, no matter how small, had the power to create lasting change. He felt grateful for the chance to help, proud of the child's progress, and hopeful for the future. The story of the mechanic and the child was more than just a tale of generosity. It was a reminder of the profound impact one person can have on another. It showed that even in poverty or struggle, the human heart has the capacity for immense compassion. The child's life was forever changed, not only by the warmth and safety they received, but by the example of care and integrity the mechanic had shown. The child's parents continued to maintain a close relationship with the mechanic, ensuring that he remained part of their child's life. Visits became regular, filled with stories, shared meals, and laughter. The child, once lost and fearful, now had a network of support, a sense of belonging, and the knowledge that there were people who genuinely cared. For the mechanic, each visit, each smile, and each shared moment reinforced the lesson that true wealth lies in the connections we build and the lives we touch. His small act of spending his last dollar had blossomed into something far greater than he had ever imagined. The warmth, care, and trust that had grown from that single moment continued to shape their lives and inspire others. The city around them continued its busy pace, but inside the small apartment and the little shop, a story of hope and kindness unfolded. The child thrived, the mechanic's life was enriched, and the community had learned that compassion could create a ripple effect, changing the world one small act at a time. In the end, the story was simple yet profound. A poor mechanic, facing his own struggles, chose to help a shivering child. That choice, made with love and courage, brought warmth, hope, and transformation. It reminded everyone that even the smallest acts of kindness could leave a lasting mark, shaping lives and inspiring change. The mechanic's heart was full, the child's spirit was renewed, and together they proved that humanity's greatest treasures are found not in wealth, but in the care we show to one another.